As children, our parents equipped us with tools we need to guide us through life. In this series titled Reparenting Your Inner Child, Mrs. Shimona discusses essential lessons required in everyone's development and how we can fine-tune our inner programming. Mrs. Shimona is an international lecturer and founder of OMEC, a nonprofit organization dedicated to in-depth transformational learning and living.
Hi. The course we're beginning is Reparenting Your Inner Child, or 12 Passages for Reparenting Your Inner Child. And the idea came to me actually when I had children and I began to be focused on educating them. And I did research, reading up about the talks that the Lubavitcher Rebbe had spoken to children. The Rebbe chose from the entire teachings and scriptures of the Jewish people, from all of the Bible and the prophets and commentaries and the Talmud and Hasidic philosophy, 12 passages, 12 verses that he felt were essential for the education of a child, how to raise a person in this world so that they will live the kind of life that they are meant to live most effectively and joyously, and give to the world, give to God what they're supposed to do. And as I began to read these, I thought to myself, I have a child inside of me. And no matter what kind of education we have received as children, we all could do with re-education. And so I began to see how it could be applied to my life, looking in two directions. How did those verses apply to me, and how were they going to be useful in terms of teaching my children how to live the life that they need to live? Not that I'm mandating who they need to be as people, but as parents we want to guide and educate our children and give them the most truth that we possibly can so that they can go out and live most effectively and joyously. So what we're going to be looking at is those 12 verses, but I want to mention first this notion of our own inner child. What does it mean that I can reparent myself? You may be familiar with the concept of Hakel, a year of Jewish unity, which is a time it would happen after the sabbatical year that all the Jews in the Holy Land would gather together at the temple. And that wasn't just a festival for adults. Every male, every female, every child had to be present in the city of Jerusalem and come to the temple. And they had to hear the Torah, parts of the Torah being read by the king. Now, that year of Jewish unity is symbolic of a unity that happens all the time. It just became manifest at that point when the Jews were in the Holy Land. But also it's speaking because the Torah is always addressing things at the macrocosmic level and the microcosmic level, speaking about something inside of ourselves. We are taught that the world is called a large body and a human being is called a small world, olam katan. I am a small world, and just as in the universe and on this planet there are men and women and children, I have inside of myself a male, a female, and a child. So what are those aspects of my being, male, female, and child? We are taught the male component in each one of us is the go-getter, out there. Ish darko likvosh. A man's way is to conquer, that I want to make things happen. The female is concerned with inwardness and connection. Kol kvuda bat melech pnima. The glory of the king's daughter is her inwardness, or is within. And we see that women in general are more focused on connection than power play, whereas the male may be more focused on slaying dragons. A woman wants to connect. I don't mean that there aren't women who are not ambitious and go out there and make things happen, and that there aren't men who aren't focused on connecting, but those are primary modalities, and we all have that inside of us. Each one of us has an inner male and an inner female. And then each one of us has a child. And what is the consciousness of a child? I've asked people, and someone will say it's playing, the child is playful, the child is sincere, the child is truthful, etc. What would you say is the consciousness? What captures the child modality? Well, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says the child is a makabel, one who receives, takes in to themselves what is available. And that's one of the reasons why we are so careful with education, to give over and expose children to things that are holy and happy and inspiring, as opposed to untruths or delusion or just emptiness. So each one of us has a male, a female, and a child. And God tells us in Tanakh that you are like a beloved child to me. The whole of the Jewish people are like a child to him. So we have to take these 12 verses and say, how does it apply to me? That's what we're going to be doing in this course. But what I would like to share first is a discourse, a talk that the Rebbe gave over to children when he first began establishing his organization for children. I think it's essential for us to communicate to children of this generation, and also to ourselves. He spoke at that time, telling the children two opposite things. On the one hand, encouraging them, you must know that you have a negative inclination inside of you. A part of you, we can call it the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the animal soul. A part of you is selfish. That is the Alter Rebbe's definition of evil. Evil is not some bad guy out there. It's the part in me that suffers from the delusion of independent existence. I'm delusional to think that I exist outside of my Creator. What I'd like to do before we go into the 12 verses and see their relevance and application for our lives is to explore briefly the first talk that the Rebbe spoke to the children upon establishing his organization for children. It's called Tzivos Hashem, the Army of God. And we'll go into the meaning of that name and how it applies to education in a little bit. But first, what was it that the Rebbe said to the children? He told them two opposite things. On the one hand, you have inside of you an animal soul, an evil inclination, a part of you that is selfish. That is the Alter Rebbe's definition of evil. That part of you that thinks that you exist outside of God. You suffer from the delusion of independent existence. So each person has that. I'm born with it. It's natural to be selfish. It's not holy to be selfish, but it's natural. And I have to work against that. And a person might think, well, how am I going to do that? Well, I have inside of me a spark of godliness. My soul is a part of the Creator, not part of creation. I don't have to buy into the rules of this world. God has created the world, and God has created me and breathed a part of himself into me. I can transcend the limitations of reality. So in this talk, the Rebbe says to the children, when Jacob traveled down to Egypt to go and meet his son Joseph, who was now the viceroy in Egypt, he traveled with his whole family, and who went? There were 70 souls. It counts who the people were, and the Torah tells us there were 70 people that went down. But when we look at the counting, at the list of the people that went down, there's something strange there. There really are only 66 people over there. So the sages comment and say, well, how do we account for the other four? And we are told Joseph was in Egypt, so he's one, and he had both of his sons. That's another two. So here we have 69. But where do we come to the number 70? And the Rebbe comments that one of the opinions is that the 70th child was Yocheved. She was a daughter of Jacob's son Levi, she gave birth later to Moses and to Miriam and to Aaron, the redeemers of the Jewish people from Egypt. And he points out, Yocheved was born, literally, between the borders, on the way leaving Israel prior to coming into Egypt, kind of in no man's land. She's an infant, hours old, and she is counted as one of 70. The message to the children is this: our father Jacob, one of the greatest people who ever lived, is one. And you, a Jewish child, are one. Just as Yocheved, a little girl, she was an infant. What could she do? She couldn't speak. She wasn't useful in any utilitarian sense. But the message is, you count. Just by virtue of being born, you matter so much to God. You are one of 70. If we can impart that to our children, I think that we can change the world. If we can get that message through to ourselves, I count. Not in a utilitarian sense that I have to stand upright and speak a certain way or do certain things. I don't have to perform. Just my being, the existence of the soul in this body, that is sacred, that is holy. And we carry with us absolute worth, absolute value. So this is the first message to the children in establishing the organization. And although it is called Tzivos Hashem, the army of God, the Rebbe makes it very clear that this army is similar to a physical army in certain respects and very different in other respects. Someone once approached the Rebbe and said to him, "Why are you calling it an army of God? Aren't our armies, have to do with violence, etc.? It's not such a positive connotation." And he said, "I thought long and hard about what to call this group, and army is what is needed, because what we need to inculcate. We live in a culture that is very much, the me generation. Who was Person of the Year last year? I think for Time magazine, I don't remember, but it was you, the consumer, right? iTunes, iPhone, YouTube, etc. The me generation, and that what we really need is to see that we are part of an authority and identity that transcends us, very infinitely transcends us, and that somehow by surrendering to this higher space, I can discover myself and my own gifts more fully. So the Rebbe said to the person, I thought about it, and I am of the opinion that what children in our generation need, they have enough of that individuality in my voice. They need to develop that sense of being beholden to an authority, and particularly to God. In this case is the authority, not just anyone who's telling us what we have to do. So each of us has our own internal child that we have to nurture. It is a recipient. We have to be feeding it inspiration and information, teaching it how to be disciplined. And each of us has to know, I have these two opposites inside of me. One part of me is selfish. It is egocentric. It's living a deluded existence. And I have to pierce through the curtain of cosmic amnesia and find my godly self. And if I can just remember that I have that point inside of me, I'll already begin to live a different existence. It means I just have to stay connected to the fact that I have that point of Yocheved inside of me. Doesn't matter what I do, a couple of hours old, but one just the same as Jacob was one.